Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Marika, and today we are doing a costume review. With the new Del Toro Frankenstein now out, which I haven't seen yet, I wanted to review the costumes of the movie that followed the story of how Frankenstein first came to be. And that is the 2017 film, Mary Shelley. It was directed by Haifa Al-Mansour and starred Elle Fanning as the title character and authoress herself, Mary Goodwin Shelley. The costumes were designed by Carolyn Kohner, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Just a heads up, this review will have spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, you have been warned. The movie takes place roughly between 1814 and 1823 and follows Mary as she meets Percy Shelley, their romance, the birth of their first daughter, the writing of Frankenstein, and the subsequent challenges of its publication. The real-life story of Mary Shelley is full of death, heartbreak, and tragedy. And so before we get into the review, I want to talk a little bit about her history for context. Mary's parents, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, were both philosophers, so she was raised in an intellectual environment. Unfortunately, she never knew her mother, as she died just 11 days after giving birth to her. When Mary and Percy first met, she was 16 and he was 21, already married and had 2 children. But that did not stop them from running away together just a few months after first meeting. Jumping ahead 2 years, it is now 1816, and they've already suffered the loss of their firstborn daughter, and their second child is just a few months old when they are visiting Lord Byron in Geneva, Switzerland. Due to the volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora in Zimbabwe in 1815, ash and dust were blasted into the atmosphere, and for the following year, dust and volcanic gases spread across the globe, dimming the sun, and it caused a year without summer. Because of this, the party was forced to stay indoors for the majority of their visit to Geneva due to the weather. It was during this time that Lord Byron issued a challenge to write a ghost story to entertain everyone. Mary began writing the story that we now know as Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. Getting back to the movie, when we are first introduced to Mary, she is quite young. Though it's not technically accurate to the time, she does suffer from the bobby pin blight that seems to plague many leading ladies in historical dramas. Now, I will give them a slight pass on this, because I feel that starting her off with her hair down does show her youthfulness quite literally, and as the show goes on, it does convey the emotional and idealistic changes that her character goes through with the physical change of her appearance. Although this film is roughly 2 hours long, she has about 40 costume looks, and several of the looks are different combinations of pieces that she has in her wardrobe, so I thought that was a nice touch. When we first meet Mary, her wardrobe is mostly the warmer earth tones, and her costumes have a lot of layers. The fabric choices of her costumes also lean more towards cottons, linens, and knitwear, and her evening and dinner gowns even shy away from the satins and silks, giving her character a bit more of a natural homespun look. Her first look consists of a blouse, a jumper dress, a knitted short gown Spencer thing, and a pelisse. Now, she does have a very thin petticoat on that you do catch glimpses of when she's running, but it doesn't really add any weight or structure to the silhouette. This look in particular was one of my least favorites in the film, and it's also one that she is wearing pieces of for a large portion of the beginning of the film. But to make up for it, she does also wear a very lovely gathered front red gown that she is wearing when she decides to run away with Percy. Her maternity wear looks like she's just wearing a regular Regency gown, and it shows off her slightly pregnant belly, so they didn't really have to create maternity wear for this film. I do like the pelisses they have her wearing, but they're all made of much thinner fabrics that don't really have a lot of body to them, and I would have loved to have seen them made out of a thicker wool or something with a little bit more substance to them. Near the end of the film, she does have a military-style short pelisse, and it looks very similar to fashion plates of the time. As Mary goes through her disappointments and heartbreak and loss, her color scheme does kind of shift into colder tones, moving more into blues and grays and purples and blacks and colder whites versus the warmer, earthier tones that she was wearing earlier in the film. When she's in Geneva, her appearance is a bit more prim in comparison to her sister Claire and the more eccentric poets. But she does have two very lovely gowns that are briefly shown that are more the classical gowns that we are more familiar with when we think of the Regency era. The accessories she wears does add a lot to her look, and I like that they add the chemisette with the ruffled neck when they are living in the townhouse. And while her hats are not the classic bonnets, they do kind of suit her character. The knitwear was definitely a choice. She had several different sweaters that she wears throughout the film, and in my research, I haven't come across knitwear in the Regency period other than shawls, mitts, scarves, and stockings. But apparently sweaters do date back to the mid 14th century, and you can find fashion plates of ladies knitting. So while I haven't seen Regency knitwear before, it's not completely unplausible. One accessory that really irked me was the coral salmon chemisette thing. Well, it did add color to her costumes. The fit and the weird neck ribbon really did nothing for me. I did find an illustration from Costume in Detail with a similar neck ribbon dated to an earlier gown, but it wasn't a chemisette. With some of her looks, she wears it underneath her dresses, and with others, it's worn over top. Truthfully, I'm not even really sure what you would call it. I don't think it's a chemisette because they don't really have sleeves, or they don't typically have sleeves, and this garment does. So if you guys know, I would love to hear your classification of it down in the comments. One other accessory that didn't really work for me, but they could see where they were going, was the scene where they first see the galvanism. And that is a fluffy little ruffle scarf thing. Looking at fashion plates, there are ruffs with evening gowns, but unfortunately, this one just didn't quite work, and it brought me back to 2010 with the little ruffle scarves. And oh my goodness, I love those in 2010, but I don't think it works for a Regency film. The final outfit we see her in is around 1823, and that is when Frankenstein is finally republished under her name. Her outfit is much more mature, and at this point in her life, she only has one living child. She's buried 3, and it's been roughly a year since Percy's death. Now, for me personally, it looks a bit more late 1820s with the lowered waistline and the shape of the skirt. I do love that she is wearing a cap and a bonnet, and that she has the curls that frame her face. Looking at it, she could also still slightly be wearing half mourning, which I don't know if they were going that direction, but that's what it looks like. And while the color red wasn't typically worn during half mourning, I did find a mention of scarlet cloth in an 1811 ladies magazine that said it could be worn during late mourning. Overall, she does have some great looks and some not so great looks, but I think Caroline created a fairly cohesive look for Mary. Moving on to Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont. She is played by Belle Powley, and I loved her costumes in this film. She's typically wearing blues and greens, but also wears some pinks and creams. Costume-wise, I think she has the best outfits in this film, but I think that also has to do with her character. She's a little bit more of a Lydia type, and because of that, I think she's a bit more fashion conscious, and so the costumes chosen for her do represent that. She has roughly 25 different looks throughout the film, which are also reworn with different pieces, just like Mary. The cuts of her costumes, the sleeves, the fabrics, they were just beautiful. She wears several gathered front dresses, and I also noticed that some of the sleeves appear to be detachable or false sleeves, and they are the ones that either can be worn long or short depending on the season. Now, there is also a beautiful pelisse with mulberry trim, and it is shown for less than a minute. I love the details on it, like the Van Dyke points on the sleeve head. It's gorgeous. And it is something that you can find examples of in extant garments. Overall, it was just a beautiful piece. Something I really liked was when Claire first goes to see Byron, there is a scene of her kind of getting ready and tying up her stockings with garters, and even though the garters were technically a bit high and the stockings were definitely a bit too sheer for the time period, it was just an added touch of her character preparing to go out, which was a nice thought. Although the dress wasn't great, I do like the finished look with the Spencer over top of it. When she is in Geneva, her outfits are a little bit more eye-catching as her character is trying to keep Byron's attention. One of the outfits is a more of a Grecian-inspired dress, and the other one is a beautiful gauzy gown with metallic trim and sequins. Again, they aren't really shown for a long time, but they definitely made an impression on me. After the trip to Geneva, we don't see too much of Claire's character, but she does rewear the same block print dress while she is pregnant, and I think it suits her very nicely. So, up next we have Percy Shelley, who is played by Douglas Booth. Now, I'm not particularly well versed in men's fashion, but I do really appreciate Shelley's wardrobe. In real life, he was part of the aristocracy, and so his clothing should reflect that. Now, he was cut off by his father, but before then, he had access to a good tailor, and so very nice clothes. Now, he's not as much of a dandy as Byron, but he is also a bit more of a peacock than Dr. Polidori. In the film, he has between 3 to 5 jacket and trouser combinations, but he does have a plethora of waistcoats and cravats in some very nice fabrics. Now, I do really appreciate his Darcy moment when we first meet him and he is strutting through the sunset in his greatcoat and top hat. And I just love that they are adding moments like that to more Regency films. His shirts are consistent with what would have been worn during the time period, and I also really liked that he had fall front trousers. But I do have a complaint that they weren't quite as tight as they would have been historically. That sounds kind of like a weird thing to say. Anyways, we're moving on. When you compare his costumes to fashion plates of the time, he does look fairly close style-wise, so I think they did a good job with his costumes. Now, the final costumes that I want to discuss are the side and background characters. So first up, we have Lord Byron, played by Tom Sturridge. And his costumes were delightful. I love that they had him in what appears to be a banyan when the party first arrives in Geneva. It seems very, very fitting for his character. Also, the array of fabrics used for his suits definitely showed off his dandy fashions and his love for the Eastern fashion influences that were quite popular during the Regency era. I would have loved to see him in much taller collars, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the fur coat, but overall, I really like how they dressed his character. On the opposite end of that spectrum, Dr. Polidori, played by Ben Hardy, his suits and waistcoats were much more subdued, but they did fit him quite well. They also gave him a much more serious and reserved air, which was very fitting for his character. William Godwin was played by Stephen DeLay. He had a couple really nice suits. I really liked his plaid suit, which he wore in several scenes, and I also really liked his greatcoat. Isabel, who was played by Maisie Williams, also had some beautiful gowns, and I really liked her purple gown with the pleated bodice, but sadly, you only see it for 20 seconds, if that. Now, Mary Jane Clairmont, aka the stepmother, is played by Joanne Froggatt, who you might recognize from Downton Abbey. I think her dresses were very pretty, but I wasn't a fan of how dark they were. I think they were going with a evil stepmother vibe. I really wished I could see more details of her gowns because her gowns do look beautiful, but just it was hard to see with the dark colors. I did like the sleeveless spencer that they put over her gowns. It did feel like they gave her a bit more texture, which made it slightly easier to see the details of her gown, but not much. Some of the background characters had some really great costumes that I would like to point out. One being the fans of Percy in the park. When you see their outfits, you see the Spencers, and they have some nice details in their bonnets. The maid at the beginning, who was wearing a very nice cap. Percy's wife's outfit. The bonnet could have been better, but I did like her outfit. And lastly, Mary's son at the very end, who had an adorable little skeleton suit on. We need more Regency little boys' outfits because they are so cute. In an interview with Mulderville, director Haifa, when asked about costumes, replied, "Carolyn's work in this film is extraordinary. I wanted a look that was period and believable, yet fashionable and elegant, enough to be appealing to modern sensibilities. She captured this look perfectly. The costumes in the film are gorgeous. I wanted this film to feel current despite the period setting, so costumes with modern sensibilities were key to achieving this goal." When I look at the overall feel of this film, I would agree that they definitely achieved that. When you compare them to fashion plates of the time, they aren't perfect, but very few are. Now, my biggest complaint for this film would probably be the lack of petticoats. Overall, the design was cohesive and it did work to tell the story, but I just wish the dresses had a little bit more structure to them. On a side note, I am not sure if the ladies are actually wearing corsets or not. I was trying to find information for this, looking through different interviews, and I did come across a mention of an interview saying they were, but I couldn't find the actual interview to confirm that source. I would give this film a 7 out of 10 for costumes, and I recommend it if you are looking for a Regency film with some mostly accurate costumes. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Have you seen this film? Are you going to watch it? And if so, what would you rate it? Also, I would love to know, have you seen the new Frankenstein? Is it worth the watch? Leave your comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for making it this far. I will see you next time with a new video, which I hope will be very popular. So, until next time, I hope you have a lovely day. Bye! The final outfit we see her in is around 1823, and that is when Frankenstein. Frankenstein! Is it sparkly enough?